Energy to join Cape Town Winders, Pilgrim Watch, and the other groups that we work very closely with, such as the Pilgrim Coalition, and Together We Can, to use a phrase. I want to say first that in this effort regarding nuclear power and energy, we have a lot of heroes. I'd say amongst them, you have a handful of very special, I'd say, guardian angels up there on some clouds. One is Congressman Markey, who's running for state senate, and he is regarded as the most effective, consistent politician working to reduce nuclear risk. He's running for state senate. This isn't a plug, of course. Also, there amongst the heroes would be David Lockbaum, the Union Concerned Scientist, Paul Blanche, Arnie Gunderson, etc., on technical issues. And above these angels is Dr. Helen Caldicott, who has worked tirelessly for almost 40 years. I've only been in it for 25 years, and I look like this. So as our Vice President of the U.S. would say, God love her. She has started out, came from Australia, got her medical degree there, then came, fortunately, to Boston and joined Children's Hospital in Boston as a pediatrician, taught at Harvard Medical School, and became, and it always has been, a leader in nuclear power issues and nuclear war issues. I started to write all the things she's done on a big, fresh, bounty towel, but then, it was impossible to have it here. She has founded so many organizations, such as Physicians for Social Responsibility, WAND, Women's for Nuclear Issues, and she's also founded Nuclear Policy Institute. It goes on and on. Further, she's written many books. In addition, has received like 21 honorary doctoral degrees, which I think is quite impressive because I did not finish my doctorate. Further, she was nominated by, wait a minute here so I get it right, for a Nobel Peace Prize, and last, the Smithsonian had named Dr. Caldicott as one of the most influential women of the 20th century, and they are now considering the 21st century, and I'm sure she will get the nomination again. So we are more than honored to have her to speak to us tonight about largely the health effects of exposure to radiation, whether it be from ordinary day-to-day releases or from an accident, whether it be from a nuclear power plant such as Pilgrim or certainly nuclear war. But she will focus on Pilgrim, and let's put our hands together and give her a great job.
Honored to be standing here in the first church that was established in America by the Pilgrims. And I can't believe they call the nuclear power plant the Pilgrim reactor. That is obscene. Because it's a reactor of carcinogenic materials and death. Okay? I'm going to walk you through this whole thing. I've never been to Plymouth. I mean, I lived in Boston for 20 years. I've been to Cape lots of times. And I'm aware of Plymouth, I mean of Pilgrim, and I've written about it and spoken about it. but it's a bit creepy to be here. It is. I mean, the fishermen and the like. So what I'm going to do is walk you through the medical consequences of living near a reactor and what should happen if there was an accident. But first, well, I'm going to walk you through radiation, how it causes cancer, what the elements are made in a reactor, and then I'll do Fukushima because it's the same design. They were the same design as Pilgrim Mark I GE reactor, which is full of faults. And I know the 3 GE engineers who designed the Fukushima reactors, the Mark I GE reactors, and they resigned in 1975 because they knew they were too dangerous to operate. They gave testimony before the Congress, but it didn't make any difference. And the nuclear industry is so powerful, it just forges on and on despite everything. And the reason is that the nuclear weapons industry and the nuclear power industry are totally combined. They're interdigitated. And the nuclear power industry was in fact developed by the nuclear weapons industry, and there was a psychiatrist or psychologist in the Pentagon 56 who said, we need to have the peaceful atom as a sort of Trojan horse or camouflage for the weapons industry. The weapons industry is all powerful, and you know that you spend $1 trillion a year on killing. You've got a socialised killing industry, which is the Pentagon. Socialised. Your nuclear power industry is socialised. And then people like Energy get hold of the reactor while you pay for everything, including insurance, mining, milling, enriching uranium, the whole thing, and sell your electricity at the cost of $1 million a day. They're criminals. And you will understand why I say that by the end of my speech. So, as a physician and a paediatrician, I only speak from a medical perspective. This is a very, very, very dangerous industry. Far worse than taking heroin or far worse than smoking, because it's going to affect all future generations for the rest of time. So even if you don't have a meltdown, the consequences are going to be vast. But I'm going to walk you through the medical effects of radiation. So there are 4 sorts of radiation. There are X-rays. So hands up here who've never had an X-ray. No? Hands up those of you who get your teeth X-rayed every year. That is totally unjustified, medically contraindicated. You do not need your teeth X-rayed ever, unless you have a painful tooth and you have a root abscess or something. My ex-husband was a radiologist. They make a lot of money. They're only X-raying teeth so they can make money, but each X-ray you receive for your teeth adds to your risk of getting cancer. In other words, all radiation is dangerous. There is no safe level of radiation, and it's cumulative. Each dose you get, whether it's a CAT scan, and don't have CAT scans unnecessarily, ever. Doctors play God, but don't treat them as God. If they say you have to have an X-ray, ask why. Be tough with us, because we do play God, and we're not God. And we order unnecessary tests, but specifically X-rays. There's now a new study to show that people who've had a lot of dental X-rays have a higher than normal incidence of brain cancer. Children who migrated to Israel years ago had tinea, fungus on their head and stuff, and they used to treat it with X-rays. And many of those children developed brain cancer, salivary gland tumours, and the like, and thyroid tumours, cancers from the radiation. There's a huge literature about how radiation causes cancer. Madame Curie, who refined radium years ago, she loved the radium. She used to walk around with a little piece of it in her lab coat pocket playing with it. When she died of leukemia, which is cancer of the white blood cells, her bones were so full of radium, because it's like calcium, it goes to the bones, that they had to bury her virtually in a nuclear waste facility. Her daughter died of leukemia. I mean, I could go on and on about how radiation causes cancer. In other words, what I'm telling you is never have an unnecessary X-ray. that you must not walk through those X-ray machines in the airport, that children are 20 times more sensitive to the effects of radiation than adults, fetuses thousands of times more so. One X-ray to the pregnant abdomen doubles the incidence of leukemia in the baby. That's why they say when you have an X-ray, when was your last menstrual period? And so they don't X-ray you in the second half of your cycle because you might be pregnant, because you've produced an egg which may have been fertilised and be damaged by the X-ray. Okay? I get whole body pat downs. I will not go through those machines. I think they're starting to take them away now. So X-rays are dangerous. They're non-particulate. They go straight through your body. So when the technician says breathe in, hold it, runs out of the room, hides behind a lead glass shield and goes click. That's the instant that you're irradiated, but you don't become radioactive. Okay, but that's the instant that your genes can be damaged to later develop cancer. Gamma radiation is given off by radioactive elements, and there are, in that Pilgrim reactor at the moment is as much radiation as that released by 1,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs. And the cooling pool on the roof, which is protected by a sort of tin shed like you put on the Kmart roof, has 30 times more radiation than in the reactor itself. You are sitting on a volcanic nuclear explosion here. And I can't understand how people can, go by it or even think about it or look, and I'm going to get into the fishermen soon and the like. If there was an accident here, no one would ever get off. They talk about evacuation plans. It's impossible. Impossible. And in the summer, I don't know, there are probably 1 million people or more on the Cape. Lots of them are rich. And why don't they get on the ball and close the reactor down? What is this sort of psychic numbing that, well, partly nuclear power sold with the American flag. And they brought in the best, psychologists and propaganda merchants to sell you nuclear power because it's patriotic, which is absolute rubbish. Your advertising agencies are very clever. Madison Avenue, they're stacked with psychologists, selling you stuff you don't need all the time. If you just buy this, and it's by coveting thy neighbour's goods, if you just buy this, which Mrs. Brown's got next door, you'll be happy forever after. And people buy this stuff and buy this stuff and buy this stuff on a finite planet with finite resources, and we're going to run out soon. I could go on and on. This is kind of capitalism, which I abhor, because you can see what happened in the global financial crisis, and those bankers should be in jail, and they're not. So they run the whole thing, but I'm not going to extrapolate on that at the moment. But gamma radiation is given off by radioactive elements made in the reactor, so if you're immersed in a cloud of radioactive elements, you are being irradiated like X-rays. They are refueling that reactor at the moment. When they refuel, a lot of radiation escapes. It's a dangerous time. I don't know how long they're going to take to refuel, Diane. How long? 3 weeks?
About.
Mary? Yeah.
About a month.
Yeah, well, you should know that it's a very dangerous time, and it's dangerous to live here. Do you know they've done a study in Germany, and they looked at 16 nuclear power plants, and children under the age of 5 who live within 2.5 miles of the reactors, the incidence of leukemia in those children was double the normal incidence. And the incidence of solid cancers was high. What's the incidence of leukemia in Plymouth? Does anyone know? Are there any statistics? Has anyone looked at it?
With the highest. Plymouth is the highest cancer
Is that
rate.
true? Are you a doctor?
Plymouth has the highest cancer rate all of Massachusetts.
Is that so? Are you a doctor?
That's what I saw on Channel 5.
Sure, on Channel 5.
No, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health has a cancer register.
Yeah.
And you can go town by town.
And?
See, not startling today, however, the above statistical expectation for radiation-linked diseases, multiple myeloma, thyroid.
They're all cancers can be caused by radiation.
Right.
Every single cancer that we know about.
After 82 is exceptionally high. When they blew their filters.
I mean, if there was one case in rabies, it would be headline in the Boston Globe. It's unbelievable, isn't it? And then people walk around with pink ribbons on their lapels about breast cancer. It's too late when you get the cancer, because we really can't cure most cancers. And the medical dictum states, if you have an incurable disease, the only recourse is prevention. You've got a cancer factory up there. It's unbelievable. And I don't know if you've ever watched a child die of cancer. With their belly swollen, bald, all jaundiced, bleeding from every orifice. That's why I'm here, because I'm a paediatrician. I specialise in cystic fibrosis, which is the most common fatal genetic disease of childhood. I've helped lots of children die. And that disease will be almost certainly increased by radiation from the nuclear power plants. I'll get onto that later. Then there's alpha radiation, which is actually particulate, 2 protons and 2 neutrons emitted from an unstable atom. And it's very, very carcinogenic. It really causes a lot of cancer, 2 neutrons. You can hold an alpha emitter like uranium or plutonium in your hand, and it won't penetrate the dead cells of the epidermis to damage living cells. However, if you inhale it into your lung, this is the right lung, here's the trachea and the bronchi, and it lands here, just a tiny little bit of plutonium, like a millionth of a gram. It just affects just a tiny volume of cells. And within that volume, one cell can be mutated, I'll describe that in a minute, and develop into a cancer. What the nuclear industry does, though, is take that radiation here and average it out over the 2 lung fields. They lie consistently. Your reactor makes 500 pounds of plutonium a year. It's the deadliest carcinogenic material we know. It lasts for 250,000 years, and you need 10 pounds to make an atomic bomb. So any country like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and the countries are buying your reactors now, sold by GE and all your other wicked companies, have bomb factories. Oh, but they say, look, we'll give you a nice nuclear power plant, but you mustn't make bombs from it. By the way, of the 20,000 nuclear weapons in the world, Russia and America own 97% of them. And you've got the most. So why shouldn't a country build bombs if you've got them all? Like, what's so special about America? And people think they're the greatest country on earth, but you know, what about Australia? We've got kangaroos. Anyway, I won't go into that. And the next one is beta radiation, which is an electron emitted from an unstable atom. They all do the same thing, and what I'm going to do now is describe how they cause cancer. You know, your body's made of trillions of cells, and inside each cell, there are the genes arranged on the chromosomes and the nucleus, and there's a gene specifically that controls the rate of cell division called the regulatory gene. And if that is hit by X-rays and alpha radiation, beta, the gene, the DNA molecule, which is a double helix spiral, is changed. It doesn't die, it's changed biochemically if the cell doesn't die from the radiation. And the cell sits dormant for any time from, well, 2 to 80 years, and that's the incubation time for cancer. And people say to me, journalists, well, no one's dropped dead at Fukushima. We don't expect anyone to drop dead. It takes a long time to get the cancer. And then you've got to take an epidemiological study and look at the whole population to see what's happening to the population and compare it to a non-exposed population. So the incubation time for a cold is 2 days. If I sneeze on you, in 2 days you're sneezing. Mumps, measles, whooping cough, 3 weeks. But for cancer, it's silent and cryptogenic. So radiation is a killer, a silent, long-term killer. And I can't tell you how many papers in the literature verify that fact. So one day the cell, instead of dividing by mitosis in a regular way to produce 2 daughter cells, it goes absolutely berserk and produces trillions and trillions of cells. And that's a cancer, and we can't stop that growth. And the cancer cells are very invasive and aggressive, and they'll invade a lymph vessel and go up to the lung, or a capillary and go up to the brain And so the cancer metastasizes around the body, and the cancer is actually a parasite, and you see a patient with cancer just withering away and dying while the cancer proliferates, and then eventually the patient dies, and so does the cancer. So it takes a single alpha particle, it hits a single gene in a single cell to kill you. And that's what people don't understand about radiation, but we all do in medicine. And the easiest audiences I ever address are doctors. I went to Harvard the other day and spoke to my physicians who I work with at Children's Hospital, and they were absolutely devastated by what I had to tell them. And they just sat there and said, but what are we going to do? Because they understand all of this intrinsically. Now, there are other cells in the body that are actually more important than ordinary body cells. And what cells are they? Yeah. He said it first, the sperm and the eggs. Very important. So here you've got a little sperm and a great big egg, and they have half the number of chromosomes and genes. Now, when they unite, you've got a fertilized egg which develops into a fetus and then into an embryo and then into a baby. Every gene in the sperm and egg is precious. And we all carry several hundred genes for disease, like diabetes, cystic fibrosis, phenylketonuria, dwarfism, all sorts. But as you increase radiation in the background and more mutations take place, the increase of genetic diseases, and there are 2,600, will increase in frequency over time. And I've been saying this for years, parading around platforms and stuff, and the other day, my God, my son, my gorgeous eldest son, was diagnosed with hemochromatosis. Now, hemochromatosis is an abnormality in iron metabolism, so he can't excrete his iron. So instead of a normal level of iron being 50, it was 860. And when you have such high levels, you're always really tired and you look pale and grey, but it stores in the liver causing cirrhosis and in the heart causing heart disease. Now, luckily he was picked up before he had any real damage, and he gets bled every month or two, litre or two every month. And that dropped his iron levels, and he's okay now. But I'm a carrier for hemochromatosis, and so is my ex-husband. And it's not till you get together to produce, two genes together that disease is manifest. It's like blue eyes. You can't have blue eyes unless you've got two blue-eye genes. You've got a brown-eye gene and a blue-eye gene, which is the strongest. You've got brown eyes or two brown-eye genes. So here's a test. Two parents had blue eyes, and they had a brown-eyed baby. How did that happen? What?
Mailman.
The mailman. You got it, Mary. So genetics is useful. All right, so now I could go through uranium mining and milling, and they say nuclear power is the answer to global warming. That's absolute rot. Because Australia has 40% of the world's richest uranium. They mine the uranium with trucks nearly as large as this church, pumping out CO2 continuously. Great big steam shovels, So huge amounts of fossil fuel are used to mine the uranium, then you have to crush it into a fine powder. It's called milling, and then you send it to Paducah, Kentucky, where they use two 1,500 megawatt coal-fired plants to enrich the uranium. The uranium is turned into uranium hexafluoride, a gas which is passed through a cascade of nickel filters, hundreds, with tiny micropores. And so the uranium is composed of 238, which is large, and 235, which is the fissionable isotope present in 0.7% in natural ore. It must be enriched to 3% for use in reactors, and above 50% you get bombs. What Iran's doing is enriching uranium, which they're totally entitled to do under the international law, but they can make bombs, but you're allowed to do everything that's necessary for nuclear power to enrich the uranium. So the uranium hexafluoride is a gas which is passed through the filters at great pressure. On one side stays 238, and gradually the 235 enriches and enriches. Now it's interesting, these nickel filters, nickel is a very precious metal. And so the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the industry are going to do what's called BRC, below regulatory concern, and they're going to recycle these nickel filters, which are very radioactive and give out a lot of gamma radiation, like X-ray, into children's teeth braces, hip replacements, belt buckles, jewellery, knives and forks, furniture. So you're dealing, when you eat your food, with gamma radiation like X-rays being emitted from your knives and forks. And most metal dealers, scrap metal dealers, they don't know this stuff's radioactive unless they happen to have a Geiger counter on hand. That's how wicked the industry is. It also gives off lots more global warming gases, but 2 huge coal-fired plants emitting huge amounts of CO2, and then you have to build a reactor, and cement, when you create concrete, lots of CO2 is made. So the nuclear industry lies from its teeth continuously. And in medicine, if we lied, we'd be killing our patients. If I lied, I would be deregistered. It is totally inappropriate for scientists to lie. That's why Rush Limbaugh shouldn't be on the air. The Earth is in the intensive care unit dying from global warming, which we're seeing very strongly in Australia now. We must not have people who don't understand science and who lie to an ignorant population. So we've got an ignorant population, we've got stupid people like Rush Limbaugh and Roger Ailes, who runs Fox, which is owned by my compatriot Murdoch, who should be dead. He's 82. But his mother died at 101 the other day, and he looks just like his mother. So, we're stuck with him. He's a sociopath, if ever there was one. So we're in serious trouble. We are. Because the media is determining the fate of the Earth. How do you educate the public about what I'm telling you? Through the media. How do you get on the media? And I will be talking to you about that, about closing down Pilgrim. Now, when you enrich the uranium, it's sent to the reactor. Has Pilgrim got a round top?
No.
It's got a square top. Okay, it's a square top. And 100 tons of uranium are packed into the core. That's a lot of uranium. And in between the rods are control rods made of boron, which moderates the flux of neutrons, because uranium is always shooting out neutrons. And you pull out these control rods, the whole thing is immersed in water. H2O. You pull out the control rods and the thing reaches critical mass and the neutrons start breaking apart all the atoms. And over 200 radioactive elements are produced, all man-made, all of which are highly carcinogenic. And this becomes 1 million times more radioactive, or equivalent to 1,000 Hiroshima bombs. Or it becomes 1 billion times more radioactive than the original uranium. It's just a boiling, seething cauldron of radioactive material, hot as hell. And as the uranium fissions, the energy released is this, E equals mc squared. And as Einstein said, who discovered this by watching a tram go by, I don't know how he did that, he said nuclear power's a hell of a way to boil water, because that's all nuclear power does, it boils water. It's like cutting a pound of butter with a chainsaw. It's mad, nuts, loony. So when the water boils, you take off the steam, turns the turbine, which generates electricity. Are these carcinogenic lights? Where does this electricity come from?
The grid.
Yeah, the grid. Don't tell me that. I know the grid. But where's it generated?
20% from nuclear.
Okay, so, these could be carcinogenic lights. We're turning the lights on. Will produce cancer in the future, and I'll get into that in a minute. Or are they global warming lights? Every time you walk through a door, it's either a carcinogenic door, nuclear powered, or it's producing global warming, and by the end of the century, they say it's going to be 6 degrees hotter, and we're not going to survive. We had a day the other day that broke all records where I live in a fishing village in Australia. It was 125. I was in town shopping, and within an hour, the temperature went up 12 degrees centigrade. And I was doing the shopping, and I got home, and I was so hot, and I'm nearly 75, so older people can withstand heat less. I had to take off all my clothes and lie naked on the floor and be covered with a wet towel to lower my body temperature. People die at those temperatures, and that's only 125. 6 degrees centigrade hotter by the end of the century. The animals and the plants will die, and our children have no future. So I go into the bathroom in an airport, I wash my hands, and there's a carcinogenic hand dryer or a global warming hand dryer. What's the matter with us? Everything's electrical and we don't think about it. We just take it for granted. Yeah, it's easy. We'll walk through these doors that open and shut. Why should we use muscles to open the door? You know, what's wrong with our muscles? Well, we don't drive much. I mean, walk much. You know, people like to drop me right there. Well, I've got legs. And if I don't use them, they're going to atrophy like the appendix. From disuse atrophy, because we won't be using them. I'm exaggerating a little. No. Anyway, so we've got this reactor generating electricity by boiling water. It uses 1 million gallons a minute of water from your ocean here to cool it. Okay? So that water goes up really hot. It kills huge numbers of fish that they suck in and mussels into the cooling. And sometimes the reactors stop because they just get totally chopped up with jellyfish. So what's that doing to the sea? And out comes water which is relatively radioactive. So what does that mean? Well, there's tritium in that water, which is radioactive hydrogen. It's got a half-life of 12.2 years, which means if you start with a pound of tritium in 12.2 years, you have half a pound. 12.2 years, you have a quarter of a pound. 12.2. So it takes 120 years before tritium becomes safe. Tritium concentrates in fish, so the tritium goes in the water and the algae sucked up concentrates it hundreds of times. The crustaceans eat the algae hundreds more times. Little fish, lobsters, and big fish. And they're catching the big fish. Has anyone measured the tritium in the fish that the fishermen catch here? It's very carcinogenic. It causes brain tumours, muscle tumours, cancers all over the body, fetal abnormalities, and the like. What else is emitted? Continuously is emitted xenon, which is a gas, 133. So you're breathing in xenon, and xenon gets through the lung, and it is deposited in the fatty tissues of the abdomen and the upper thighs, where there's a lot. And what's located there? The gonads. So they're irradiated because it's a very high energy gamma emitter. This is a beta emitter. Beta, you say. Very carcinogenic. And when they remove, and when they are refueling, they send out a lot of what they call crud. And I can't remember what crud stands for. Can you remember what it is? It's a really funny term, but it's all sorts of stuff that's accumulated in the pipes over time that's composed of radioactive iron and all sorts of things, nasty radioactive elements, and they extrude them through the pipes into the bay. So right now, if you measure the water in the bay and near the reactor, it's probably pretty radioactive. And the fish need to be measured consistently by the EPA. But nobody should be fishing here. And the reactor must be closed down. Now, people say it's going to take 5 years. And the lawyers say, 5 years, and what are the legal arguments? If you get involved in the law, they go round and round and round and round. You use all your energy writing petitions and writing this and writing, and they tie you up. So you don't do it through the law, because the laws are written to protect the corporations. Energy is a really evil firm. And they just, you pay for the production of the uranium, the building of the reactor, enriching uranium, pay for everything. It's a socialised industry. And then energy gets hold of it. And they sell electricity at the rate of $1 million a day. So of course they don't want to close it down. They're making money. But what about you? What about you? What are the other things made in the reactor? Well, I can't go into all of it, because 200 elements are made, some of which last seconds and some millions of years. But let's go through. Radioactive iodine, it's a gamma and a beta emitter. Where does iodine go in your body? Thyroid, yeah, right. So, it's got a half-life of 8 days. It's around for about 10 weeks. When there was an accident at 3 Mile Island, which is 13 miles from Hershey's chocolates, a hell of a lot of this stuff got out. And they took the milk, which was very radioactive, because that's where the cows graze, richest dairying area in America, can you believe? And they put a nuclear power plant there, and they powdered the milk for 10 weeks until the iodine decayed away to nothing, and then they used the milk for the chocolates, except lots of other stuff got out too. And I'll talk about this in a minute when I come to Fukushima. Then the cesium-137, which is a nasty thing, beta and gamma, and it's got a half-life of 30 years, so it's around for 600 years. Well, 300 to 600. Lots of that got out in Japan. Then it's a calcium analogue, so it goes to brain and muscle and causes really nasty cancers. Next one is strontium-90, which has a half-life of 28 years. It's around for 300 to 600 years. It concentrates in the food chain. It's a beta emitter, and it goes to bone. So here's the femur. That's not a good drawing of the femur, but it irradiates a few bone cells where it causes bone cancer, like Teddy Kennedy's son Edward had. He had his leg amputated. This is a nasty form of cancer. It metastasizes to the lung and the like. We can help these patients now, but they used to all die. And leukemia causes leukemia, which is cancer of the white blood cells. And leuco means white, meaning that blood fills up with immature white blood cells which can't fight infection, and the patients die of infection like AIDS patients die. Great stuff, strontium-90. And then the next one is plutonium, which is why they made nuclear reactors in the first place, to make the bombs. Oh, you've got to have bombs, you know, national security. What a lot of rot. You've got enough bombs to destroy the planet. On hair trigger alert 1000, you know, like 10 targeted on Moscow, hydrogen bombs. 10 targeted on New York. As I speak, Robert McNamara and I wrote an article about that. And they talk about terrorists. Who are the real terrorists? Russia and America. And God Almighty, we're friends now. We trade with them. What on earth do these men think they're doing? Targeting us with hair trigger alert, 1,000 weapons on each side, hydrogen bombs. Obama gets 3 minutes to decide. You watch Obama. He walks as a man behind him with a cap, holding a suitcase. In this case, it's called a football. And the code to start a nuclear war, it never leaves his side. Same with Putin. When Reagan was shot, they lost the football for 2 days. Remember Alexander Haig got in on television and said, I'm the boss now. Reagan nearly died. I met with Reagan for an hour and a quarter in the White House and tried to teach him about nuclear weapons. So plutonium, we know it's 10 pounds to make a bomb. It lasts for, you know, 250,000 years. It's the most carcinogenic agent we know. And it's like iron. It goes to the liver, where it's stored. It goes to the red blood cells, where it's stored, causing cancer everywhere. Crosses the placenta into the developing embryo, where, like the drug thalidomide, it can kill a cell that's going to form the right half of the brain or the septum of the heart. That's called teratogenesis. A normal, genetically normal fetus damaged by radiation getting into the fetus. And also plutonium has a predilection for testicles. So it tends to concentrate in testicles. And every male in the Northern Hemisphere has a tiny load of plutonium in his testicles from weapons testing days where it's still falling down. And it locates just next to the cells that are forming the sperm, just here. So it's irradiating the cells and the genes, which then get passed on generation to generation down the time track. And if the man's cremated, the plutonium goes out the chimney so someone else can breathe in the plutonium for the rest of time. That's what Pilgrim means. So now let's go, after that little lecture in medical effects of radiation, to Fukushima, which were the same designs as your reactor, Mark I. GE reactors, and they built 6 of them on an earthquake fault. Very clever. And they say that it was absolutely human error that caused this. So they had a big earthquake and then they had a tsunami. So what happened was In the basement of the reactors were diesel generators, so they lost the external power from the electricity and the earthquake, and you've lost external power to your reactor 3 times this year. Sorry, if you lose the external power, the pumps don't work to circulate 1 million gallons a minute of water through the reactors to keep them cool. So they lost the power, and then they started the diesel generators in the basement, each about as big as a house, and your diesel generators are in the basement. And then came a tsunami, and it drowned the diesel generators, and they had no power. They were running out to get batteries from the cars to try and power the pumps. Within the first 2 days, 3 reactors melted down. That means it was so hot that it turns into a sort of volcanic mass, and it's called corium, and it melts its way through the reactor vessel, 6 inches of steel, onto the containment floor and through the concrete. It's called in the industry the melt through to China syndrome. And you've seen the film, probably some of you, with Jane Fonda in it, Jack Lemmon. That's what they talk about. And so during that, when that happened, I just held a conference in New York on the medical and ecological effects of Fukushima. And I had the Japanese Prime Minister on video talking about what he did during the disaster. TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company, was going to evacuate all the workers. If that had happened, the whole thing would have blown, and it would have been the end of much of the Northern Hemisphere. So he rushed to the reactor and he said to TEPCO, you were not to evacuate the workers, because if they did, not just would Fukushima Daiichi go, but there are 4 reactors just a couple of miles away called Fukushima Daini, and they would have had to evacuate too. And they were talking about actually evacuating 50 million people. Where do they send them in Japan, which is so heavily populated? They still think if there's an accident, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, they might have to evacuate, you know, the whole of Tokyo, which is 35 million people. So the Japanese, first of all, 80% of the release went across the Pacific because the winds were blowing from west to east. And lots of it, and there's more radiation that's been released into the Pacific than ever in the history of the human race, and it's still being released. Like 400 tonnes of water a day are being used to cool the cores and the spent fuel pools. So, and then the winds changed, and they blew towards the northwest in Japan from Fukushima, and Tokyo's down here. And then they changed, and Tokyo got a hell of a fallout. And some of the soil in Tokyo now is so radioactive, it would be sent to radioactive waste dump in America. So 35 million people are living with huge amounts of radiation. I went there, I wore a mask, and I said I'm not going unless I'm fed non-radioactive food. The fish here are extremely radioactive, 63%, carry a huge amount of cesium. The people fled into the path of the highest radiation plume because the Japanese knew where the radiation was going, so did the Americans, but they didn't tell the Japanese people because they didn't want to create panic. So there are now 10 million people living in extremely high radiation zones, which the Russians evacuated. It's interesting, the Russians were much more proactive and responsible medically than the Japanese. There's a huge cover-up going on in Japan. And every day these reactors are releasing millions of becquerels of radiation into the air and the water every day. And it goes around the Northern Hemisphere. And you got it, I mean, the ambient levels of radiation in Seattle went up 40,000 times above normal in the first few days. Now, they've looked at over 100,000 children in Fukushima under the age of 18 by thyroid ultrasounds, because they really, the NRC and the IAEA only look at thyroid cancer, they ignore all other cancers. And of those, 42% of the children have thyroid cysts or nodules by ultrasound. 3 have developed cancers already and had their thyroids removed. 7 more are suspected, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. It means, because in Chernobyl, we didn't see thyroid cancer for 5 years. This is early, this is 2 years. Meaning these children got a hell of a dose of radioactive iodine, plus all the other elements they were immersed in this cloud of radiation. And that means there's going to be lots and lots of cancers. What we do know at Chernobyl now, from a study by the New York Academy of Sciences, is that over 1 million people have already died from Chernobyl. But we don't know that because the media is not pretending to it. The media are determining the fate of the Earth, and they're being really wicked. It's all about celebrities and reality television and God knows what, but it's not about protecting the fate of the people of the planet and the genetic material that's passed on generations for the rest of time. So the accident at Fukushima is not ended and will never end. Half of Japan is contaminated with cesium. 40% of the European continent is contaminated with radiation. I don't buy European food. I don't know what batch is radioactive and what is not. Because the radiation, like cesium, lands in the soil and concentrates in the wheat and the rice, and the cows eat the grass and it concentrates further in the cow's milk. I can't draw a cow, but that's the operative organ. And it concentrates in the cow and the meat. And then the pregnant woman or the woman breastfeeding a baby, it concentrates more highly in the breast. And as it passes through the breast, it can irradiate cells causing later breast cancer. And the little baby who's so sensitive to radiation is drinking radioactive milk. The wheat, the rice in Fukushima is radioactive. The mushrooms so radioactive they can't sell them. The tea south of Tokyo, 400 km from the reactor, is very radioactive. It went everywhere. Don't eat any Japanese food. No seaweed, no miso, no fish, nothing. I know Japanese food is not. I went to a restaurant in New York the other day, sushi restaurant. People drinking sake and girls all dressed up and their big shoes that they wear these days and everything. And I said, where did the fish come from? Oh, they said Japan. So I got fish from New Zealand. So you mustn't eat any Japanese food or European food. So look, when you go to the supermarket, where the food was produced. The next thing is that there's a building 4. 3 of them blew up, and on top of building 4, which is where your cooling pool is, on the roof, is a huge amount of radiation, about 150 radioactive waste, 150 tons. And it sits 100 feet above the ground, like you guys, 100 feet. And this building was very damaged by the earthquake. So they say if there's an earthquake greater than 7 on the Richter scale, this building will fall down, the cooling pool will collapse, the water will leak out, and the rods, the radioactive fuel, will catch fire and burn, releasing 10 times more radiation than at Chernobyl. And it's going to go right around the northern hemisphere. And they are talking about seriously evacuating Tokyo, 35 million people. But I'm going to evacuate my family from Boston, because I've got a baby aged 4 who lives in Boston. Because the radiation goes around the northern hemisphere, but it doesn't mix at the equator, so we don't get it in the south. Yeah, we'll get the fish, the radioactive fish swimming all over the Pacific and the like. And your EPA stopped testing fish caught on the Pacific west coast. They're not testing the ambient levels of air. And if this goes, God help us all. What they're doing is building a new building around it that's strong enough to hold a very big crane on the top. So the crane can lift the rods out and put them in dry cast storage, and that's going to take years. And then, the Japanese have said they don't want any help from the international community, but now they've just accepted that maybe America can help them. This is a global problem. And what I just wanted to say too, that the radioactive waste that you've got here, huge amounts of it, lasts for 1 million years. The EPA says it must be buried, isolated for 1 million years. You can't do that. That's impossible. So any container lasts for less than 100 years, as the stuff leaks out into the water streams underground, and it comes up to the streams, and it bioconcentrates in the food chain, the fish, the rice, the wheat, the cattle, everything. The food's going to be radioactive for 1 million years. And people are going to be eating it. And you can imagine generations hence, people waking up in the morning, their babies being born deformed, like no brains. That's happening in Fallujah now, where America's using radioactive weapons. Or single eyes, and we had a paper presented in New York about a village near Chernobyl where there's a very high incidence of Siamese twins and no brains, babies born with hearts outside their chest or their abdominal viscera exposed, or spina bifida. There are homes around Chernobyl full of the most deformed children we've ever seen, and that's new in the history of paediatrics. Never seen that before. That's what's going to happen in Fukushima. That's what will happen here if you have a meltdown or an accident. This is a medical problem. It's nothing to do with commerce or corporations or politics. It's medical. And preventive medicine is practiced through the medical process. How do we stop smallpox in the world? We taught the politicians and they immunised people all over the world. Now it's been eradicated. How do we stop diphtheria and tetanus and whooping cough and little graveyards full of children who died? By immunising the children. How do we stop polio? Because Joan Salk and Sabine developed the vaccine. But we can't stop cancer. And so we're going to see people waking up in the morning, children born deformed, breast milk radioactive, food radioactive, and children getting cancer at the age of 6 instead of 70. That's what this reactor means. What a legacy we're leaving to our descendants. And people say, well, the children will have to fix it. So we can turn our lights on. How utterly irresponsible of us. And we immunise the children, we clean their teeth, we educate them, but they have no future. They have no future from global warming, because everyone, I see no evidence in this country. The whole country should be covered in solar panels. And windmills covered. And after Pearl Harbor, it took America 7 months to change from building cars and everything to building weapons. 7 months. You can't tell me that your country can't change from $1 trillion a year on death machines by Lockheed Martin and Boeing, etc., to building solar panels all across the country and windmills. Then you don't need a CO2 or nuclear. You could do that in a couple of years, because America's very smart. And bugger the money. I say bugger because I'm Australian. You know, to hell with the money. This isn't about money and what we're going to save and all the rest. This is about saving life on the planet. And you can be the leaders. You can be the energy superpower of the world and do the right thing. Because everyone emulates you, and your lousy advertising, your stupid capitalism. You only buy that, you only buy that. There's a story about Eskimos who, braided leather and they dried their fish and the young went out hunting, and then they got electricity and they used to watch Dallas, and the old women started praying for the people in Dallas, and the young kids fled down to where it was all going on. Television's the worst thing that ever happened because it's a great way to brainwash people, yeah, psychologically. So that's Fukushima. Now, Pilgrim. I'm going to now read to you what would happen if there was a meltdown here. This is from my book, Nuclear Power is Not the Answer, which you all must read. It's like I had to read Grey's Anatomy to become a doctor. It was hard work, but I got the prize in clinical anatomy when I don't know why, but anyway I did. In my year of 150 people, there were only 10 women, so it was interesting. There were lots of boys to fall in love with. I had a ball. Now, we know that sea levels are rising, and as sea levels rise, and catastrophic storms are occurring more and more frequently, global warming, all detected and prognosticated. So as sea levels rise, these storms, they're going to drown your control rooms at Pilgrim. You could easily have a meltdown. And the Highland might block off your electricity supply. Bob, your uncle, you're gone. Would anyone get off the Cape? No way. They talk about evacuation. They're idiots. I mean, any person with a brain like my 4-year-old grandson would know you can't evacuate the Cape. What happens if it happens in the summer? Forget it. You'll all be irradiated if the wind's blowing towards the Cape, which it could easily be. What are you going to do? So I'll first describe the meltdown in New York, which was Indian Point. And then I'm going to go back and describe how a meltdown could actually occur. And I could easily produce a meltdown myself. It's very simple. Just block. I mean, I was outside Indian Point the other day in Bobby Kennedy's boat. And if I'd been a Timothy McVeigh operator and had a little speedboat full of fertiliser, explosive, I could have driven it straight into those two cooling pipes that take in 2 million gallons of water a minute from the river, and within hours we would have had a meltdown. Easy. You can walk into your reactor, there are no guards, people are flying planes over the bloody thing. I mean, Christ almighty, this is crazy. You are sitting on top of a nuclear weapon. Sorry, there's a meltdown here, and it could easily happen. Imagine this. Over 300,000 people are running and driving away from the stricken reactor along winding Westchester roads, and just extrapolate to the Cape. Stuck at traffic lights and in traffic jams, all are in a state of panic, anxiety and acute disarray, trying to reach their children at schools, their spouses and their mates. Then they begin to taste a strange metallic flavour in their mouths. They infer that each breath exposes them to deadly radioactive gases. The radio blasts out dire warnings, yet nobody knows what they're doing and nobody's in control. What about Manhattan? Extrapolate to the Cape. Millions of people, 1 million people, trapped as the bridges, Midtown, Lincoln and Holland tunnels are closed, but you'd never get across the bridge. Totally blocked, hiding in their apartments, hardly daring to breathe. If everyone took inert potassium iodide, you all on the Cape should have potassium iodide tablets. That's a rule. Which only blocks the uptake of iodine, it doesn't prevent all the other organs getting irradiated. As soon as they heard about the meltdown, before the plume goes over them on the radio or TV, doses to their thyroids of radioactive iodine could be reduced by only 30%. It should therefore be mandatory that every person living within 50 miles of a reactor stop potassium iodide in their medicine tablets. Yet the NRC requires that KI tablets be available only for a 10-mile radius of population. The NRC is the nuclear industry. They don't understand medicine, they don't understand radiation biology, and they are, the fox guarding the chicken coop, Dracula guarding the blood bank. Children, I said, are very radiosensitive and the like and the like. And then I talk about how many people would be affected, everyone would be. But I want to describe what happens if they lose the cooling, which has happened at Fukushima. First, as cooling water leaks or dissipates from the reactor core, because there's no pump, the intensely hot radioactive pellets and the fuel rods overheat and swell, and the zirconium cladding, coals of uranium pellets, oxidizes and ruptures. Volatile radioactive isotopes that have collected the gases in the gap between the zirconium cladding and the fuel rods that then releases gases into the atmosphere of the containment building. This is what happened at Fukushima. These elements include the noble gases argon, krypton and xenon, which are very radioactive, as well as radioactive iodine and cesium. This whole period is called the gap release phase. Lasts about 30 seconds. I love their language. As the core continues to heat, the radioactive ceramic fuel pellets themselves will begin to melt soon. And as they do, large quantities of radioactive isotopes will be released into the reactor vessel and into the containment building atmosphere. The molten fuel will drop to the bottom of the reactor vessel. It will melt 6 inches of steel and drop, which has happened in 3 reactors, and drop through the vessel onto the bottom of the containment building made of cement. The period when the reactor vessel is breached is called the early in-vessel phase and will last about 1 hour. 1 hour. At this point, meltdown is irreversible. Extrapolate to your own life. What happened tonight? When the molten fuel hits the bottom of the containment building, it will violently react with water that is collected there and with the concrete of the floor releasing even more isotopes. Well, we got hydrogen explosions in 3 reactors that totally devastated the reactors, and that's exactly what could happen here. This is called the ex-vessel phase, which lasts several hours. When the molten core hits the bottom of the vessel, it may trigger massive steam explosions that would blow the reactor vessel apart, simultaneously releasing high-velocity missiles that could rupture the containment building and violently expel radioactive gases and aerosols into the outside atmosphere. If the reactor vessel is not blown apart, the molten fuel just drops through the bottom of the reactor vessel onto the floor of the containment building, initiating a hydrogen or steam explosion, which we saw in 3 reactors, and which would then rupture the containment vessel, causing a rapid purge of the radioactive content of the containment building into the environment. This sequence involving the molten fuel penetrating the reactor vessel and containment building is similar to what the nuclear industry calls the melt-through to China syndrome.
And then it migrates to spent fuel pool.
Right? And then you've got the spent fuel pool, which would go as well, which has got 30 times more radiation than the reactor itself. Now, when you get a really high dose of radiation, which you would living here, within 2 weeks, your hair would start falling out. You would get awful nausea and vomiting and bloody diarrhea because the gut cells reproduce fast and they're the ones that kill, and hair cells. And the blood cells die, so your white blood cells would die. And your platelets would die, so you couldn't prevent bleeding. And you die of massive hemorrhage or infection within 2 weeks, which is how people died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a new disease which we had never seen before in medicine. That's how many of you would die. And if it's just here and the wind's blowing over Plymouth, you'd almost all die from that. People are further downwind would get a lower dose, and they'd be exposed to ground shine from the elements on the ground emitting gamma radiation like X-rays, and then food would be radioactive. You would inhale the radioactive elements, and there'd be an epidemic of leukemia 2 to 5 years later. And solid cancers, except thyroid cancers, appearing early now, 15 years later. Now, I'm a doctor, I've just told you the truth. And you're probably in a state of shock like any patient is if I tell them they've got pancreatic cancer and they could die in 6 months. But we're obliged to tell you the truth. And you'll probably feel very shocked by what I said, and you might think, well, she made a mistake, so I won't believe her. And then you'll go into a state of depression. Allow yourself to feel that. Don't drink or, don't drown it out. Stay with it, because it's through that depression that the brain starts operating, and then you reach a stage of anger. And then you know what you're going to do. But no one will tell you. It will come from within you. Now people say, what are we going to do? No, we're going to lawyers and stuff like that. No, you use your bodies. We all think we sit for our computers and we do Facebook and Twitter, and it doesn't do a bloody bit of good. Think of Wisconsin, where the people took over their state house. This is your country. Your representatives in Congress are not your leaders, you are their leaders. They represent you. You'd better elect Ed Markey. I've worked with him since 75 and he knows what he's talking about. His father was a dairyman, and he did a paper at high school about radiation in the milk. He knows. He's a good man. I love it. We got the nuclear weapons free through the House, Ed and I, with the help of Tip O'Neill. So you'd better elect Ed. But, you've got to put your bodies on the line. I've just been in Northampton, where the women who are trying to close down the Mont Yankee, the oldest one is 94. Oh God, they've been arrested 25 times. Now arresting is all right, but it gets a bit boring after a while. And the media gets bored. So I'm going to tell you something quite startling, and you don't have to take this seriously, but it's a thought. But what I want you to do is use your imaginations and work out what you are going to do. And it's no use saying aorta do that. That's the aorta syndrome. It's not the vessel coming out of the heart. It's aorta fix the bridges, and they ought to all get together and close down Plymouth. And the lawyers, they ought to get together too and work it out. No, the only person you can change is you. And if you change you, you can become a leader and others follow. So you have to listen to your own soul and your heart. You have to get up in the morning and look at yourself in the mirror in your eyes and think about who you love most in your life. And your grandchildren and children. And pledge that day that you're going to do everything you can to save their lives and close that thing down. It's really up to you, no one else. Not me or anyone else or lawyers, it's up to you. And you know, it's a privilege for us to even be here, that your sperm, the night your father had intercourse with your mother, of all the millions of sperm, each one totally different, your sperm reached your egg. What a privilege it is that we were even conceived and born. What are we here for? We're here, this generation, we're here to save the planet. We're here to save maybe the only life in the universe. Carl Sagan thought we were the only life. That's what we're here for. Happiness is derived from serving others, not trying to make yourself happy. Not the pursuit of happiness, it's serving. And I know in this audience there are enough people, if you really get going and feel in your soul like a lioness protecting her cubs, that sort of ferocity, you're going to close that thing down. Soon. I was going to tell you one other anecdote, but, well, maybe I will. Then we'll take questions. Notice I don't blow my nose on trees. Trees are the lungs of the earth. We have to leave the trees because they can reverse global warming. It's a handkerchief. And my handkerchief will last till I die if I don't lose it. I wash it with my underpants in the shower in the morning. When handkerchiefs dry, the viruses and bacteria die, and they send you all this crap about, Kleenex tissues, the young mother holding a baby, wiping away the baby's tears with the baby's future. Huh? Okay, so I'll just tell you one funny thing we did, just to give you an idea, but it's just... So, I was speaking in the Herbst Lecture Theatre where the United Nations Charter was signed with a guy called Patch Adams. You know that clown doctor? Yeah. He wears the jaw, the mandible, or the skull in his ears, a funny guy. Anyway, and we were talking about Y2K. There could be nuclear meltdowns, there could have been a nuclear war. The Pentagon lost its computers for 8 months over the rollover. But I talked to the Pentagon from the White House. They said everything's right. They lied to me. Anyway, no one was interested. The media was bored stiff. So Patch went to the mic, and there were about 300 people in this beautiful theatre. And he said, I've been telling Helen since July we should take our clothes off and walk across America. And I thought, oh, hell, Patch, So I went to the mic and I said, hands up those who'll take their clothes off. Every hand went up, like 300 people. And someone yelled out, I'll ring the media. So we go out to this sort of red velvet foyer and I think, oh. And then I thought, oh well. So I got my gear off, but I left my scarf on, which hid the naughty bits, and my pearls. The Patch took everything off, and everyone else took everything off. There are thin ones, fat ones, and the human body naked is actually extremely beautiful, and I can tell you that as a physician. And we're so vulnerable. The nakedness reflects our vulnerability to what I've just been talking about. Medicine's a sacred profession. People take their clothes off and examine their bodies and hear their darkest secrets. This is what it's about. So then I thought, what are we going to do? So we went up onto Van Ness Avenue. It was dark, and it was cold, and we started walking down Van Ness. Lots of us. And someone started chanting, nudes, not nukes. Nudes, not nukes. And then cars were driving along, and they'd pull up and stand on their plates. They didn't even know what we were doing or why, And so we got to the edge, up to the corner. I thought, I don't want to go off in a police van to an American police station stark naked. So we came back, and no one wanted to get their clothes on. They were all standing around little knots talking. I've never seen people so proud of themselves and so brave. And it was a courageous thing, yet totally benign. And beautiful. It was beautiful. Well, we're in the New York Times the next day. Because they want to see the naughty bits, So, I'm on the phone talking to ABC News, stark naked, And actually we got our clothes on and you went. But you've got to think of ways to attract the media that are bored stiff, non-violent it's got to be, but it's got to be imaginative. And I don't know, are you going to take clothes off? I did. Wait till it's warm. But I talked to Northampton and in a church like this yesterday, yak, 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 and I heard people going out through the foyer saying, I'm going to get naked. They said, I'm not going to get arrested, but I'm going to get naked. So look, you can have fun, and it's a very benign, beautiful thing. And it's symbolic. You know, you could all go to the Congress in the summer and surround the Congress in Sutherland Strip, you know, and hold hands and say, we want to survive. This is our bodies, so that they're totally vulnerable to this and nuclear war and global warming. You've got to fix it. That's just an idea. I mean, I've got a million ideas, but I just give you one, okay? So with that, thank you.
In men, and do you think that would be a consciousness raising?
Sure. That's how I stopped uranium mining in Australia. I went to all the unions. I was talking, I had 10 minutes, and they were all well lubricated with beer, because Aussies drink a lot of beer. And they talked for 5 minutes. I thought, what am I going to do to get them? So I started talking about the medical effects of radiation upon the testicles. Utter silence. So the one thing that Australian workers care about is that pair of organs. I had 5 minutes to finish the lecture, and they said, oh, God, we don't want our kids growing up in a world like that. So they sent a telegram to Gough Whitlam, the Prime Minister. So I got round to all the unions, and they passed a resolution to neither mine, transport, nor export uranium for 5 years. So you've got to get to the soft spots. You know? Well, I can as a doctor, I can talk about that. You know, I can talk about anything, really. Yeah. Stand up and talk loudly.
Yeah, come to the mic. Yeah.
You don't need to if you talk loudly. We'll hear.
Well, I understand that there would be radiation in Fukushima, of course, because it was right there. But then you said Western Europe. Now, I don't understand, and I can see... So that went west?
It went all over Europe. It burnt hideously for 10 days, and it went all over Europe and Soviet Russia, all over. In England, there are farms full of lambs that are so radioactive they'll never, you know, the farms have to close down for the next 300 years. They can't sell the farms. There are radioactive boar, wild boar running around Germany, so radioactive they almost glow in the dark. Have to be shot and buried in radioactive waste dumps. The food in Turkey is incredibly radioactive. They got so much fallout, and the Turks are so annoyed. Turkey? Yeah. Was it Turkey? Yeah. And so they picked all their tea and sent it to Russia, because it was all radioactive. I've just been in Turkey. I practice psychic numbing when I'm in Europe, and I eat the food. And as my doctor daughter says, well, Mum, don't worry, you're too old to get the cancer anyway, you know. You won't live long enough anyway, so well, that reassures me. But I don't, you know, I'm very careful when I'm at home, because Australia, we don't have nuclear power at home, we just export uranium, because it's too dangerous for us. And the uranium in the Fukushima reactors was Australian uranium, so we're killing people. Much worse than exporting heroin. Epidemics of cancer and leukemia and genetic disease forevermore. That's what our uranium means. That's what this bloody reactor means. And I can't think of a medical situation ever in the history of medicine that is more dangerous than this industry. That's the cancer factory and the bomb factory, period. And if you say it outright, this is a cancer factory, people will start getting a message. Right now, there's lots of stuff going on. You know, you shouldn't grow fruit or vegetables here. You'll have tritium in it and all sorts of radioactive elements. Don't eat the fish. Well, it depends where the wind's blowing and where the rain falls, and you know how much radiation is coming up that day and falling down as the rain falls. Yeah.
How far should you live away from the power plant as of right now?
Well, you shouldn't live on the Cape till the thing's closed.
What's the every everyday use of the power plant? What's the safe distance away?
There's no safe distance.
You shut it down, or you shut it down in what?
No, you shut it down. It's medically indicated. Like, you know, if you've got a cancer, we take out the kidney with cancer in it. That's what we do to try and cure you. You take out this cancer here, which is sitting on Cape. Cape Cod's cancer, this thing. Use sort of descriptive terminology that will get Mr. and Mrs. Joe Sixpack sitting at home watching The Simpsons and stuff. You know, that, oh my God, what about my children? You know, they're terribly sensitive to it. You know, unless those people understand we're nowhere. Yet if you organise the population, the politicians pay attention. Because that's power. Education, yeah.
Dr. Caldicott,
Loudly.
in our town, we found that there was a presentation made at another Unitarian meeting house.
Yeah.
And it convinced a lot of people in the audience that thorium was a safer
Who
alternative
presented that? Who?
to people who,
From where?
well, they were both connected to the nuclear industry
course.
one way or the other. But they were very convincing.
Yeah, they're
to
idiots.
people.
I'll tell you why.
And I would love to have
Yeah, I'll tell you
you
what.
on this video talk about thorium so that people who were concerned.
Okay,
Were
let me
they-
tell you.
they got
Thorium
misinformation.
is a decay product of uranium. Uranium decays to a whole lot of what they call daughters, not sons, daughters. And one of which is radium, which Madame Curie refined, which causes bone cancer and leukemia. Polonium, which killed the man Litvinenko, that Russian spy, and they put it in his tea. And it might have killed the other Russian man that's just died, and it probably killed Yasser Arafat. So there are a lot of, but thorium is one that's quite plentiful. Now, thorium is not naturally fissionable. Like, there are only two fissionable elements, really, is uranium-235 and plutonium. And now they're talking about extracting plutonium from the spent fuel from your reactors by melting the radioactive waste, so radioactive, in concentrated nitric acid, and from this radioactive hot cauldron precipitating out the plutonium, which they did to make the bombs, and then making fuel rods of plutonium, and making Generation 4 reactors. Oh, they're great, modular, small, fast reactors, and the plutonium is the fuel, and the coolant is liquid sodium. Now, if anyone's done chemistry in this audience, they'll know when you expose liquid sodium to the air or water, it explodes and burns. And they've already had sodium fires on these things. And only 9% of the plutonium fissions, causing strontium, cesium, and all the other elements. The rest is left there as plutonium. Now, if you lose your coolant, you've got tons of plutonium in the reactor when 5 pounds or 10 pounds is critical mass. Do you understand? So it melts together and you have the most massive nuclear explosion, releasing so much plutonium that, I mean, that's it. These people are mad. Now let me tell you about thorium. Thorium is not naturally fissionable, so you have to mix it with uranium-235, which you have to get by all this process I said. And as the 235 fissions, it produces from the thorium uranium-232 and U2 and uranium-233. 233 is fissionable, but it's incredibly toxic and radioactive, like gives out huge amounts of gamma radiation. So to get the uranium-233 to put in a reactor to produce electricity, you have to reprocess, like melt the fuel with the uranium and thorium and uranium-233 to extract the uranium, and reprocessing is a very dirty process and terribly dangerous to the workers. They are exposed to huge levels of radiation. Then make the fuel rods with uranium-233 and put them in the reactor. It's economically totally out of this question. So these men are mad. There's some sort of psychotic element in the nuclear industry, and I want to write about this, a book called Why Men Kill and Why Women Let Them. And it's got to do, it really does have to do with testosterone and hormone receptors in the brain and behaviour, and sex comes into it. You know, the two instincts or that trigger the release of endorphins in the brain, or it's not endorphins, what's it, lovely?
Dopamine.
Dopamine in the brain, sex, you know, when you have an orgasm, it feels fantastic. That's dopamine, like morphine, and violence in there. And it's in the midbrain, and these two centres are very closely connected. So why do they show porno films to men taking off from aircraft carriers to bomb and kill people? Why do men rape women when they go into the battlefield? I mean, what is the connection between violence and sex? I want to explore that and lots of other stuff. But what is this wondrous thing about nuclear power? Well, there's a man called Hugh Gustafson, who's an anthropologist, who went to live with the weapons makers in Los Alamos years ago for a year and drank beer with them, went to their churches. And you know, their language is fascinating. When a man's designed a bomb, he goes into the desert with it by himself, and the night before, he sleeps with the bomb in the desert by himself. And he talks about giving birth to the bomb, and he talks about having labour pains and the need to push. After the bomb explodes, he talks about postnatal depression. This is the terminology that they use. And I've written about this in my book, The New Nuclear Danger, a whole chapter on the psychology. So they compare annihilation to creation. I mean, that's sick. That's psychotic. And what we need to think about is that 1 in 20 people are sociopaths, I think. Sociopaths tend to be brilliant, charming, erudite, but they have no conscience, no moral conscience. And you can think of them: Rumsfeld, Cheney, Wolfowitz, Pearl, go on. And these are the ones with the neurosis that rise to the top like cream. And we let them, and then they run the world. And now they want to blow it up, clearly. So until we make the diagnosis of the etiology, which is the cause of the disease infecting the planet, we won't cure it. We won't cure it. And I'm going to write this book, and it's going to be provocative, and so often a man will stand up in the audience all petulant and say, you know, you've attacked me. I say, look, man, this has nothing to do with you. This is a generic problem of the human race. Sit down. And then a woman will stand up and try and placate him and brush the dandruff off his collar and make him feel better. And I say, woman, sit down. This man can handle this himself. You know, this is a generic problem of human beings. Are we an evolutionary aberrant? And I would submit at this point that we are. Have we got the ability to rise above our sort of fundamental emotions that are engendered in our midbrain? We use our neocortex to rationalise everything we want to do till the cows come home. I don't know. I do know this, and I'll end with this, that I've delivered a lot of babies, and they're absolute purity. And they're born with that. We all are. And I have helped a lot of men die, or their children die. When they're dying at the cold face, they will open up like a rosebud, opening up and tell me all the wicked things they've done in their life. I know that every person on this earth knows morality, is in touch with their moral feelings and their soul. They know what they're doing. But when they're on the deathbed, it's too late. So what I would like to do is to appeal to that moral base in all human beings with which we were born and are born, to rise above all the rest of this stuff and save the planet. I think we can, but you know, is there time? Got to get rid of nuclear weapons fast, we've got to close the reactors down, we've got to stop global warming. And can we become moral and a kind of spiritual beings, psychologically evolved? I believe we can, but will we? Because the pressures are such that, you know, you don't do that. And that's what the churches should be preaching, and the Catholic Church should get off its shtick about all the other stuff and, you know, start really teaching what that great psychiatrist Jesus taught and Buddha taught.
Helen Caldicott, is it possible that there's a pleasure in being violent
Of course.
and destructive?
Of course.
And maybe that is the missing ingredient?
Well, that's what I said. Dopamine is secreted with violence and with sex. Why do some men ejaculate when they go into battle? They do. Yeah. I've been told by people. Yeah.
Really, a couple of specific, very mundane questions. I'll bet that there are no more than 10 people here
Stand up.
who haven't been involved. Oh, I'm sorry. I look around, I recognize almost everybody. It's the same people over and over who've been trying very hard to reach the larger community. And I ask you too, I mean, as you ask, why aren't people angry? Why aren't people frustrated? So the only
Because
thing...
they're ignorant.
Yes, and they're ignorant, and we have been, some of us, many of us, all of us in our own ways have been trying to educate them.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult. So one of the things I'd like to ask you specifically is I did watch that wonderful conference that your group sponsored in New York. I watched it online. It was a webcast. It was fabulous. And I went online, and you can now view it.
Yeah.
I urge everybody. It went
Yeah.
on for 2 days, but it's absolutely excellent. The other thing I wanted to ask you, and I think I may have forgotten because it's been in my mind for so long. Oh, yeah. I live 8 miles from the nuclear power plant. And I've been trying very hard to figure out how I can get information about what's really happening to the people in Fukushima now who live within a 10-mile range. I've only been
They
able...
can't, they're not living there. That's an exclusion zone.
Within 10 miles.
Yes. But 10 million people live in highly radioactive areas that should be exclusion zones, including lots of children. They're playing in radioactive areas. They are eating radioactive food. The government is encouraging the Fukushima farmers to grow more food now and feed it to the children and people.
Oh,
There's huge cover-up.
one more specific about the wonderful conference.
Yeah.
And it is online. Can we use clips?
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
As long as you credit the Helen Caldicott Foundation and PSR. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Please use that because you can educate yourself. No, Fukushima is an absolute disaster. Yeah.
What is the online?
Oh, if you go to HelenCaldicottFoundation.com, you can find the whole conference online and listen. It'll take you 2 days to listen to it. But they're excellent. So, I mean, we had an oceanographer from Woods Hole who's measuring the radiation in the sea and the fish in the seafloor. We had Dr. Wernicke who looked at this village near Chernobyl where the people eat all the local food. Their level of cesium is very low. They've got a very high incidence of congenital abnormalities, including conjoint twins and the whole thing. We had Timothy Mousseau, who's a biologist who goes into the exclusion zones at the threat of his own health and is looking at the birds and the insects in Fukushima and Chernobyl. The birds have smaller than normal brains, and we saw that in Sweden after Chernobyl because the developing brain is very sensitive to radiation. The birds, many of us are sterile, the males. They have tumours, they have abnormal beaks, mutations, and we extrapolate always in medicine from animal experiments to us. And that's how we work out if the drugs are okay and the like. That's going to happen to us. And the work he's doing, I think he'll get a Nobel Prize. If he lives, because he's exposing himself to high, and his name's Tim Mousseau. And we had a wonderful radiation biologist from England, Ian Fairley. We had the Japanese Prime Minister, who was Prime Minister at the time, opening the conference. I mean, it was really stupendous. Yeah, and you'll learn a lot about biology and medicine if you listen and watch that conference. Yeah.
I was wondering why there aren't more professionals who are well educated, such as the physicians you spoke to. I know they understand it. Why won't they speak out?
Because we're not, yeah, you're a nurse, but we're not taught about nuclear power in medical school. We're taught about radiation and X-rays.
I'm a nurse, and I would ask physicians that I worked with
Yeah.
in the operating room
Yeah.
or wherever about radiation
Yeah.
exposure. I went to the radiologist
Yeah.
trying to find what level I was exposed to, and I was pushed away all the way through, and I bring it up to physicians and surgeons, ask them direct questions, and they did not want to hear it.
They don't know.
They did. They
When I get mammograms, I march into the radiologist's office, I say, what's the dose? And he has to look it up in a book. No, they don't.
I don't get it. I don't understand. I know.
Yeah, but you're more intelligent than most doctors. Doctors tend to be a bit stupid. Yeah?
Yes, you said that this is a health problem
and it would seem like it's a public health problem.
Exactly.
So I wonder where the American Public Health Association is, where HHS is, even CDC and the state health departments.
I'm going to be addressing the American Public Health Association annual meeting in Boston in November, so I'm going to teach them.
Now,
What?
those agencies,
No, they're not involved.
they're not involved.
No. And I've been trying for years with the cancer institutes in Australia and here to get them involved, and they won't be. Anyway, look,
But I just add a comment as far as the state departments of public health. It depends what directive they're getting from the governor. It goes down to the Secretary of Health and Human Services. It then goes down to the commissioner, and it depends then whether anything is going to happen.
bypass the law. Bypass the law. Most politicians are scientifically and medically illiterate. They have no idea what they're doing. And, you know, then they become tools of the corporations because they've got
No,
money.
they know what they're doing.
Well, they're evil then. Did you build a gas oven, Stevie? Soon the kids are going to be saying, but Daddy, did you help to build nuclear power plants? Yeah. It's that sort of morality or immorality. It is really evil. And I can't think of any other word to describe it as a physician, having devoted my life to medicine and taken the Hippocratic Oath and totally dedicated to medicine and my patients. And I'm a paediatrician. All the world's children are at risk. We're leaving them heritage at our radioactive waste. So don't tell me you can't close this thing down, including Mr. Bruce back there.
I just want to thank everyone. I'm Diane Turkle with Cape Town Winders, and we're going to shut this thing down this year. We are shutting it down, all right? And we're going to get the bodies out. The next time we're there, we're going to have a massive civil resistance action coming up this spring. And we want every one of you to be out there in the street. And you're going to bring 5 people with you because we have to shut it down. The politicians aren't going to do it. The town's not going to do it. We have to get out on the street and shut it down. Right now, huh?
Do we address?
No.
Wait, that's for discussion. That's for discussion. Right now on Cape Cod, we have a public advisory question, and it's calling on our governor to call on the NRC to uphold their mandate. The mandate is right on their website to shut any nuclear reactor if the public safety cannot be assured. And I don't know if you folks know that MEMA emergency director Kurt Schwartz for the state came down to Cape Cod and said the bridges will be closed. You are in harm's way. You'll take the radiation hit, and then you'll be relocated. And that is not acceptable. And the public needs to stand up to the state and to Entergy. And how dare Entergy give us, how many of you have KI pills? Okay, I know the good doctor told you you need your you have to have KI pills, but you have to think of them in a different way. What is KI? Purchased by the utility for you. It's a corporate anti-cancer pill. A corporation is purchasing these pills for you to take so you don't get cancer from their operation. You know, on the Cape, yes, thyroid cancer. So on the Cape, we're saying we can be proactive or reactive, and the state wants us to be reactive and have plans and whatever. Oh, we're going to be proactive, and we're shutting it down this year. So we have to go home and talk to our neighbors and our friends and our family and get them out this spring to shut it down.
Yeah, and I've
okay?
got a thought too.
And
so what you do is you invite all your most resistant Republican friends and relatives, and you have a nice dinner party, really nice, and you wear your pearls and everything, and then you lock the door, and then you show them this video and scare the bejesus out of them, because it's medical, it's not political, because I'm a conservative. I'm for conserving life, right?